Hello everyone. Today the stories will be unusual, even mystical, but they all are real, from our lives. There is not a single gram of fiction here. All the stories are written by real people right now, several weeks or months ago. The experience of death is probably as unique as the experience of life. Some people only need tasty food and quality sex in life, while others can't live without puzzles and TV series. Possibly, at first, you need all of these things on the other side, out of old habit, I guess. As a child, I often dreamed that I was walking around a very beautiful, almost heavenly city and people would come up to me and give me strange things, asking me to pass them on. These were perfume bottles, fountain pens, sausages, ribbons, and many other things that I couldn't identify due to my age. All of these things were very colorful and bright. And so I walked further through the city with these things and gradually passed into a black and white place with the skeletons of houses. No roofs, doors, ceilings, only half-ruined walls and many sad people. The parcels were intended for those people. I can't call this place hell, just sad, empty, joyless space. So when I gave those things to the recipients, I somehow recognized them. They seemed to remind who they were and where they came from. They reminded that there was something else besides that place, that there were those who remembered them and still cared about them, that it was possible to get out of there. They just forgot how. When my grandfather died, he didn't ask for anything, but he often came in the dreams and told stories. This was typical of him during his life. He was not attached to things and liked to tell tales. But the relatives of my friends, who passed away, also asked for things they were attached to, in life, even juicy cakes and bracelets. But that was at first. After a couple of months, the requests stopped.
I remind a story with a friend. Nina's husband died on her birthday. She had a dream as if her husband came and said, "You don't have to come to me. I got married there." Next time we were going to the cemetery to clean up, we walked around for 2 hours and couldn't find his grave. I said out loud, "Nick, I won't give you any cigarettes, we are going home." And we found the grave in about 10 minutes. And before the marriage, we always found his grave quickly.
My husband's new posthumous wife came to me in a dream. She said that I was grieving in vain. That he married her and her name was Larissa. I felt bad. I was not needed here, nor there.
I also want to write my story. My daughter died when she was very little, only 4.5 months old. She had heart problems. It was 1974. Now they would have saved her, they would have simply sewn up the valve. Medicine has made great progress in this area. But I will continue my story. About 4 years have passed since her death. I had a dream. I was standing in a square, just a big area, nothing around. No houses, no trees. There were many people next to me. I did not understand why we had gathered. Only some rays appeared in the sky. The clouds parted and I saw the face of Saint Nicholas. I know his icon. And suddenly steps began to fall from the sky, just glass ones, hanging in the air, like shelves, not leaning on anything, one lower than the other. I thought, who should I wait for? I saw a pilot coming down with a suitcase. People standing in the crowd immediately hugged him. Apparently he died on the flight. Many came down, but all young, in the prime of life. There were no old people. And suddenly, when everyone had met each other, a girl of about 4 to 5 years old hugged my legs. And she said, "Mom, don't worry, I go to kindergarten here, I have many friends." And they left. The kids were holding hands in pairs. I woke up. So she told me that she was doing well in heaven. May my little girl rest in peace.
A friend of mine arrived at a hospital in London in a serious condition, with COVID. It was the first wave of the epidemic. His oxygen level was 40%. He was dying. When he was unconscious, he saw his mother, who had died 6 months earlier. She was sitting on his bed and talking to him. And he recovered. When he was being discharged, the doctors said he had no chance of surviving. They were all shocked. Once he had a clinical death at 21, during surgery after a motorcycle accident. He knew he would die at 21, that knowledge was inside him. But he was revived. And, there, he met his grandfather, whom he had never known and had never even seen in a photo. His grandfather had died before he was born. Later, he looked at an old family album with his mother and, seeing a photo, said, "This is my grandfather." His mother was surprised. How did he know? Then he told where he had met him.
I worked in intensive care for many years. One day an elderly man with a progressive chronic disease was admitted to our department. His condition was serious, but he was in contact. His name, if I am not mistaken, was Henry. He told me that a month ago, he buried his beloved Nina, his wife. He missed her, yearned for her and talked about their long life together. And so I came to work, ran to him to say hello, because in such a department, people who are conscious are rare. I came up, he smiled at me, said hello and said, "I will die in an hour. Look, my Nina has come." And he turned his head to the high-set window, where only the tops of trees were visible in the distance. Of course, I did not see anyone in that window. And that's how it happened. He had a sudden cardiac arrest. So we could not save him. And the smell came from him at the time of resuscitation. It smelled like fresh grass. He was a good man. May him rest in peace. It is true that death smells like freshly cut grass. Here's another story. They brought me a seriously ill patient. By seriously ill, I mean that her condition was between life and death. They did a tracheostomy on her, inserting a tube through an incision in her throat into her trachea so that the equipment could breathe for her, since she couldn't breathe on her own. The body was tired of fighting and refused to breathe spontaneously. That's why they inserted the tube, to help. The operation had just been performed, and there was a lot of blood under the bandage at the site of the incision on her throat. I decided to remove and change the bandage before it all dried, and the patient was in a drug-induced sleep, under anesthesia. And of course, she couldn't feel that I was changing the bandage on a fresh wound, since they were also injecting sleeping pills and painkillers into a vein. I prepared everything that was necessary. I removed the bandage, and in some places it was already stuck tightly with the blood. I carefully moistened the dried bandage with the solution so as not to tear off the clotted blood and not to provoke new bleeding. And at that moment, my patient abruptly sat up and opened her eyes, and looked at me so angrily. To say that I was scared is to say nothing. She was in a deep sleep under painkillers, and could not feel anything. She sat up, looked at me angrily and collapsed back onto the bed. I was dumbfounded by this. Night came, they let me go for half an hour to rest and eat. I decided that it would be better to take a nap during this time. I curled up in the chair and began to fall asleep. And then I was poked with all their might in the throat, right into the trachea, in the place where they make an incision for a tracheostomy. I could not cough up from the pain. I went to this patient and asked for forgiveness. She was also in a drug-induced sleep. I realized that she felt pain and she let me know that. That's the story. In the intensive care, they also called me a witch. And this started when I worked in the ambulance. I would go into the department and smell the odors of death. And each person had a different smell of death, from the pleasant smell of freshly cut grass or wild flowers, to a disgusting, earthy, rotten stench. And so, every shift, when I went into the department, I would catch the smell from the threshold and go to it. And he would bring me to the patient, and the numbers of the person's time of death would simply appear in my head. And it always happened right at that time. Many colleagues shied away from me, and I understood their reaction perfectly well. Just imagine, I would come to the ward and say, "Get ready, this person will die at 5 a.m. That's how it happened. But the strangest thing was that, for example, a homeless person could smell like lily flowers. And a person, who looked good, well-groomed, could smell like rotten potatoes or a public toilet. And when we managed to save a person for a while, to postpone the time of death, and he could talk, and after talking to them, I realized that a homeless person who, for example, smelled like flowers, turned out to be a wonderful, sincere person, and those who exuded rot were simply harmful and nasty people. And how can all this be explained? Here's another strange story from the ambulance. A call for clinical death. We're flying to an address. It turned out to be an office. A young man of about 40 was lying on the couch. Fortunately, his wonderful colleagues started resuscitation themselves, as best they could. We ran up to the girls who were rocking their colleague, and quickly changed them. But direct cardiac massage is not effective on the couch. The person needs to be laid on the floor. And the guy was big, 120 kilograms, and we were 2 girls and a driver in our team. While the driver was preparing the equipment, a defibrillator, my colleague and I quickly took the guy by the arms and legs. I held his head in the air with my foot so as not to hit him, and lowered him to the floor like a featherbed. We didn't even feel the man's weight, and later we were surprised how it happened, as if someone helped. Then we start hitting with a defibrillator to start the heart, everything according to the resuscitation algorithm. Shocks, direct cardiac massage, medications, cardiogram, and everything from the beginning. At the 7th treatment of the current defibrillator, I started to massage the heart, pump and look into his half-opened eyes. They rolled up and I felt how his life is slipping out from under my hands. In my head I mentally screamed at him, "No, my friend, it is too early. They are waiting for you at home." And then I felt under my hands. I did not feel this while doing the massage, as if there was some resistance. I cannot explain in words, but as if I drove something back, and then the guy opened his eyes, and said looking around, "Girls, can I help you?" We have hysterics from laughter. In general, the man survived. He even wanted to get up, and was very surprised at what was happening. And when we lowered him on a stretcher into the car, I asked him what he saw. He said, "Very strange dreams."
I also want to tell you about the size of the coffin. My grandmother died on February 8, 1982. My father, as I remember now, measured her for the coffin. The next day they brought the coffin. And it turned out to be wide. Those present whispered that, they say, it's a bad omen, someone will die soon. So, on February 10 they carry Granny, and my father is told that his eldest daughter from his first marriage died. She was 30 years old.
My son-in-law died when his child was 1.5 years old. A year later, on the anniversary of his death, his daughter and grandson took lunch to the cemetery by taxi. As usual, she left a juice, pancakes, candies, cookies there. They were getting ready to go home, and the grandson, who was 2.5, stopped and held his mother back, loudly saying, Daddy, Daddy, bye." The daughter asked, "Where is Daddy?" And he pointed towards the cross. "There's Daddy, eating and drinking juice." The daughter said later, the taxi driver's eyes were bulging. He was surprised. He said, the boy was too young to fantasize. He would say what he sees. That's how it was. Later at the memorial dinner, the old ladies said that children could see things that they didn't show to adults.
I worked for one old lady and helped her around the house. She seemed to be in good health. And then one day she told me that she was sitting on her bed, it seemed like a vision, and she saw that her things were gathered around her, everything was wrapped in bales, and she understood that she had to leave. She spoke very unpleasantly, that they wanted to evict her. She said that she was very indignant. Why should she move out of the apartment, and the rest of them continue to live in it? It seemed like relatives and her grandchildren arrived from another city. All her things were already gathered. And at that moment her son came into her bedroom, all the bales disappeared instantly. She wanted to ask her son why all her things were gathered, but she didn't. She thought her son would think she was insane. She had such a vision, a couple of weeks before her death. And 2 weeks later she died. And the most interesting thing is that on the day of the funeral, her daughter-in-law collected all the things, tied them in bales, and gave them to the neighbors.
Before some terrible events happen, I dream of my aunt and uncle. They died long ago. So, the first time it was before the tsunami. Such a long table was laid on the ground, just from here to the horizon. There were lots of exotic dishes. And my aunt and uncle were fussing, decorating everything beautifully. And they did not pay attention to us, my family. It was a shame that we, like poor relatives, were standing to the side. The second time the table was a little smaller, and my aunt said that they will arrive soon. And we were again to the side. A plane with hockey players crashed. And the very last time, the table was for one person. And my mother sat down at the table and began to eat porridge. For some reason I know it's yellow, maybe millet, but with pumpkin. We had never eaten anything like that. And she just raised the plate closer to her mouth and ate with a spoon, as if she had been hungry for a very long time. A few days later she died.
It happened 20 years ago. I was living with a boyfriend. His mother died of lung cancer. He loved her very much. One day I was driving and saw his car on the side of the road. I pulled up alongside it, and he was sitting there crying. One day, during our conversation, a message came into my head: tell him not to worry. Everything is fine with me. I am happy. I realized that this was his mother. Then I saw her image in my head. I started mentally explaining that this was impossible. He would think I was crazy. She started putting pressure on me: tell him, tell him. I firmly made it clear that I would not tell. And then it was as if a heavy stone had been placed on me. I couldn't breathe. In one breath, I blurted out to him, your mother is here. She asks you not to cry and not to be upset. Everything is fine with her. She is happy. And then a new message came. She also asks me to take her younger brother for an examination. Check his lungs. After that, it became easier and I could breathe. He was in shock. In the morning, he came with his brother and asked to tell him the whole story with Mom. I told him. I saw that he did not believe me. I went to bake pancakes. About 20 minutes later, the men started calling me. I ran into the living room. Two men were sitting in armchairs, pale, and looking at the chandelier rotating around its axis. The windows and doors were closed. There was no draft. And I got the message again. I told them, this is your mother. I'm glad you listened to her and took your younger brother for an examination. She loves you and drops in occasionally. My boyfriend's brother lived 60 kilometers from the city. They were examined in the morning. I didn't know this. And the lung images showed problems. That's the story. Thanks to your channel. I'm not crazy. There are many like me.
People should know and not be afraid of the inevitable end of life. I will try to be brief. One day, a very old aunt of ours, Clara, died. At that time my mother and our Granny Clara were the only ones left from that generation. All the other aunts and uncles had died. And we decided not to tell my mother that she was the only one left at that age. We did not want to upset her. She would not have gone to the funeral anyway, since she was already practically blind and almost deaf. And she could not walk herself. Her legs were already giving out. And so, the day after the funeral, my mother asked me, so, my daughter, is our Granny Clara alive? Well, yes, I answer. Well, my mother said, so she is alive. And the day before yesterday she came to me and said that she came to say goodbye. She died, she said, today. All of us, who were nearby, then had our eyes popping out of our heads. That's all for today. Subscribe to the channel, leave your comment or a story and activate the notification bell not to miss our new videos. Bye bye.